Welcome to this episode of the Be Ready Utah PrepCast. I'm Wade Mathews, the Be Ready Utah manager here at the Division of Emergency Management. Joining me today are Jona Whitesides, the Preparedness Bureau Chief of the Division of Emergency Management, and Tanner Patterson, our Finance Manager. So thank you for being here today. We're excited to be talking about really a topic that some of us probably don't think about when we think about emergency preparedness, and that is important documents. Having stored copies of our important documents. Why is that important in an emergency or disaster, having those copies or having access to those documents?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for having us here. We're excited to be here. I guess one of the most important things is so that you can start to put your life back together after the disaster. And unfortunately, we live in a day and age where it requires verification and identification of who you are, what you have. So when we look at either it's a driver license to verify who you are, to be able to get money out of your bank account, or if it's to show that you have ownership of this vehicle, or your medication, your insurance things. So just all those things are important. They're everyday things that we usually have with us and we think about them. But what are we going to do in a disaster directly after it?
And just some examples. You mentioned your identification, but some of these important documents that we need to be making sure we're collecting and storing and copying are like insurance policies and wills and receipts or titles and deeds and those types of things, right? So are there some examples when in a disaster where these things have been, the result of not having copies, or when they were helpful having a copy of those types of things?
Yeah, so I've been with the division for quite some time, and I do remember in 2005, after Hurricane Katrina, Utah brought about 300 or so individuals who had been evacuated out of those areas. And when they got to Camp Williams, they didn't have anything on them for the most part. A lot of times evacuation is, you don't have that allotted time to say, okay, we have to gather up all our stuff and go. They just had to go. And so unfortunately they didn't have a lot of their documents that would have either identified who they were or proved who they were. And so that took an additional time for law enforcement and the coordination between states to, one, basically intake the people, to find out, name, date of birth, those other things, to verify it, and then to be able to basically allow them to leave Camp Williams to find an apartment, to find work, to receive some of the government services that are offered here in Utah. That took some time just because they didn't have anything with them. And had they had even just a copy of a state-issued ID or a passport, birth certificate, driver license, that would have expedited the process very much so.
And some other good examples of those important documents as well. Some other examples, maybe here even closer or more recently in Utah, we're talking about evacuations. Are there instances where people may evacuate and then come home to nothing?
Definitely. And so with your home, with your vehicles, things like that, you had already mentioned insurance documents, but there's also mortgage information, car payments, things like that you'll want to make sure you have copies of, because while most of it is resolvable, having those copies expedites the process post-disaster. You can get started on getting your life back together immediately after you get your feet set. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, here locally with fires and everything that's been going on here, it's a good time to be thinking about what are your important documentation, or what is your important documentation, where are you going to store it, how's it going to be accessible, or if you're not going to store it, who's going to have it for you.
Yeah, good examples there. Don't wait until that knock on the door for an evacuation order before you decide what are my important documents and where are they. Mm-hmm. Do I have copies of them? That's something we should be doing now, right? Don't wait for that evacuation order to come to decide what do I need to have to take with me. Yeah, there's been some unfortunate cases recently where some of these wildfires have resulted in damaged and destroyed homes. And maybe all those people have left is what they took with them in that initial evacuation. So that's kind of some homework we want people to do, is go to think about now, what are those things that I need to take in an evacuation order? What are my important documents? Where am I going to copy those? So yeah, that takes us to the next thing. Although there is one other example that you mentioned prior to shooting about one of our elected officials, a story he tells about an evacuation order.
Yeah, so our own Lieutenant Governor, Spencer Cox, has talked a lot about how wildfires have been a big part of his life down there in San Pete County, where they've had to evacuate. And he said at one time when they really thought it was getting close to their house, his wife had asked him to get two things from the house: the birthday cake, because it was their son's birthday, and the computer, because it contained all of the pictures. And so the lesson he kind of wanted to hit home with that is that, are we prepared? And even the fact that he had the pictures in the computer, could they have gone a step further and put those in the cloud or somewhere else where they wouldn't have had to maybe put themselves in that situation to go back for something if it wasn't necessary? Now, and that's the other thing too, we got to remember, really our pictures sometimes are some of our most prized possessions because of our memories with our family, our friends, our loved ones. And so, and really we have the technology today that there really is no excuse to not be proactive and store those things. I mean, I remember back in the day, if you wanted to scan in a picture, you had to find somebody with a scanner, and usually it was like a dial-up service, and they could only send one picture at a time in an email. But we live in the day and age where we can, do tons of gigabytes at a time of these pictures. So we should be proactive now and look at those opportunities to put those things in places like the cloud or on a thumb drive or an external hard drive that we can just grab and go.
Yeah, exactly. That does take us to the next question. Then is there a preferred method for storing, or any and all methods, more than one?
So any and all, but I would say most importantly, redundancies, having the originals, making sure those are safe, whether that's in a safe deposit box, in a fire and waterproof safe somewhere in your house, but then also having them possibly electronically, reduced sized images in a booklet that you keep in your emergency kit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's no best way, but whatever is accessible to you, and just as with most things, finance and everything related to that for a disaster, it depends on you and your situation.
So I've heard a few ideas already mentioned that I think don't really cost much, I should say. I guess there's an expense to buying a flash drive, right? There's an expense to external hard drive. You mentioned the cloud. There's a cost to this, but isn't it worth it? If we know that we've got these things saved, copies somewhere, peace of mind at least, knowing that we have access to these things after disaster.
Yeah, and I know that Tanner's he's an Android user, so I'm not an Android user, I'm an Apple user. And I know they give you about 5 gigs of storage for free, and then if you want additional, I think it's like $1 a month is what you pay. And I don't know if there's something comparable to that on the Android device, so it's really not a big cost. I mean, we easily spend more than $1 in the vending machine.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, again, we've got the cloud, we've got external hard drives, thumb drives. You mentioned safety deposit boxes, safes, fire and waterproof safes. How about having a copy at a relative's house? Is that a recommended thing to do?
Definitely, especially neighboring cities. Typically, if they're in another state or another country, it's not super accessible. But yeah, if you've got family around the valley here in Utah, for example, yeah, definitely give them copies. One thing when we're talking about redundant places to store this documentation, you also want to make sure that the documentation is up to date, because oftentimes with a lot of preparedness activities, we do it once and then we're set forever and always. But insurance policies change, mortgage information changes, just about all of these documents are subject to change except for the birth certificate. So you'll want to make sure that those stay up to date.
Okay, great suggestion there. And then you mentioned, we've kind of mentioned this book again as a way of storing those important documents, making a scanned, shrunken copy. But this kind of takes us into our final topic here too. And we've kind of mentioned a few things of those important documents, what types, but we want to make sure everyone knows that there is a list of all the different types of important documents that you ought to be copying and storing. It's available on our BeReadyUtah.gov website. You can go down and download this, print off this copy, make sure you're including all of these things here in your copies of important documents. So for example, in this little booklet, we've got photos of our family with identification markers on there, identification cards, driver licenses, social security cards. We've got insurance policies. We've got church records, we've got marriage licenses and death certificates, we've got birth certificates, vehicle registrations, health insurance. I think somebody was talking about health insurance cards and licenses, diplomas, education, certifications. That's a pretty good list of things we need to be thinking about of what we should have copies of. Anything else you'd like to add about at this point? This is a part one of this two-part series. We're going to be talking about finances in a disaster in our next part. Anything else you'd like to add?
I would just mention an additional resource. So there's the list on our website, Be Ready Utah, and it's a great list of just things to think about. The FEMA also provides the Emergency Financial First Aid Kit, which is a little bit more of a narrative, and it kind of walks you through the process. And it gives you similar examples and then makes some recommendations, like setting up certain times each year where you go through those, make sure they're up to date, make sure anything new in your life is added to that. So there are a lot of resources out there to follow along with and make sure you're financially prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I think that's the time that we have right now. Thank you for joining us with your great information. Thanks for watching. Again, this is a two-part series. Make sure you catch this one and the next one on our YouTube channel, all of our other social media channels, and we'll catch you next time.
Hey, hope you enjoyed this episode of the Be Ready Utah PrepCast. Like what you're seeing? Have a question about anything related to emergency preparedness? Or do you have a comment about something you've learned as you make a plan or get a kit? We'd love to hear from you. Comment or reply to us on Twitter or Facebook at Be Ready Utah with hashtag BRUPrepCast or in the comments on YouTube. We'll talk about it on one of the next episodes of the Be Ready Utah PrepCast. Don't forget to share these videos and your own adventures in preparedness with your friends, family, neighbors, and coworkers, because anytime is a good time to talk about emergency preparedness. See you next time.